Hey there, I'm your host, Virginia Elder, the owner of Podcast Abundance, the leading provider of podcast audio and video production support for financial service professionals. This is the first of a 5-episode mini-series in which you'll hear directly from me about podcasting for your business. In all my other episodes, you hear business building and podcasting tips. But in this mini-series, we're taking 3 steps back. I've received a few questions about what podcasting even is. If you have a YouTube channel, is that a podcast? Once you record your voice, what do you do with it? How do you get your show on a podcast app so people can actually listen? Do you need a videographer? Where do you put the videos once they're recorded? So in each of the 5 upcoming episodes, starting with this one, you can expect to hear about the following topics. 1, what podcasting really is and what you need to create a proper show. That's this episode. 2, why choose podcasting as your marketing method and how to make it actually drive client acquisition. 3, how much money you should plan to spend on this marketing endeavor and for how long. We'll talk about opportunity cost, sunk cost fallacy, long-term commitments, and ROI. 4, what to say, how to structure your show, and how to use batch recording to your advantage. And 5, repurposing and longevity tactics, social media, blogs, newsletter, FAQ episodes, and much more. These 5 topics cover many of the most important, frequently asked questions I get on social media, in consultation calls, on coffee dates, and during networking meetings. Get your notepad ready because I'm about to answer all your podcasting questions from the top. First, let's talk about what podcasting really is. To fit the originally intended definition or method of podcasting, your show must have an audio element that's broadcast to various apps where people can listen. And that's done using an RSS feed. An RSS feed is the link to your recordings that's distributed out to all of those podcast listening apps from one source. So to podcast, you record audio, upload your MP3 files to a podcast host account, and then use that source, your podcast host account, to distribute your audio episodes everywhere people listen to podcasts. Starting in 2004, what was referred to as an audio blog became available on iPod. Remember those? And it was being broadcast across the network, hence the name podcast. These days, there are more options in both listening apps and devices for consumers, and in styles and podcast host accounts for creators. So let's break those down a little. As a podcast host, you need a podcast host account where you'll upload your audio, title your episodes, add your cover art, write episode descriptions, and adjust the settings for your podcast. From inside this podcast host account, you set up connections to all the listening apps and platforms that will broadcast your show. Listening apps are like iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, Amazon Music, and Pandora. Believe it or not, there are nearly 20 platforms for listening to podcasts now. Having your host account and creating those connections to all those platforms ensures that every time you upload and publish a new episode, your episode is automatically fed to all those apps via the magical RSS feed. Your options for a podcast host account at this time include companies like Podbean, Buzzsprout, Libsyn, Captivate, and even Castos, with prices ranging between $5 and $30 per month, depending on the data and features you need. If you're having Podcast Abundance launch your show, we pay special attention to the settings inside your podcast host account and properly connect your RSS feed to every podcast player app available before your show even launches. You're responsible for opening, paying for, and maintaining ownership of your podcast host account, and it should always remain set up under your name and email so you always have access to your show no matter who's doing the post-production edits and scheduling. Now, let's talk about the way video has begun to impact the definition of podcasting. To put it plainly, video adds an additional layer of complication for the podcast host because now you're behind the camera and worrying what you look like and your background and about your video quality, but also for production because video is edited differently and needs to be posted to different platforms. These additional factors aren't to be seen as barriers. You just need to be aware that there are more factors to consider when producing a video podcast than an audio-only show. It used to be that you were either a podcaster or a YouTuber. You either did audio or video. Now, people are recording weekly videos, posting them to YouTube, and calling that a podcast. A YouTube-only show doesn't have an audio-only version available via RSS feed to the typical podcast listening apps. So that's not really a podcast. However, consumers of video on YouTube have even started to change their language to say, oh yeah, I watched this podcast on YouTube. Kudos to Google for pressing video results to the top in search and making video so widely accessible. Since about 2020, we've seen a big push towards video, leading to a term called video first podcasting. This is where podcasts that used to be audio only and that are available on listening apps are now also being recorded in video. Edits are even being done with the visual results of the video as the production team's primary focus. In 2024, YouTube officially added the RSS feed feature to creators' channels. So now podcasters can connect that RSS feed and have their audio-only show on YouTube also. It works the same way as it does now with any podcast app. Each time you upload an episode to your podcast host account, it's automatically pushed to any platform you have connected using that RSS feed, including YouTube. Most people don't know this, but Apple Podcasts have had the capability to host video for years, but now Spotify does too. And of course, there's YouTube, like we were just talking about. So at this point, as a creator and host of your own show, you have a variety of choices when it comes to educating and reaching your ideal audience members. You can produce an audio-only podcast. Those platforms and that listenership in the entire podcast industry is still growing like crazy year after year. You can also choose to record video at the same time you're recording your audio, like I am doing right now. Recording video gives you the opportunity to capture a different group of people that may not listen to audio podcasts, but might consume your content via YouTube. That's a key piece of knowledge about reaching your ideal viewer or listener. Audio-only podcast listeners who use an app to listen while they drive, jog, or do dishes are a different group than the people who will consume your videos on YouTube. It's not an overlap. It's two different groups of people. The other advantage to recording video is the ability to repurpose the recordings on social media as Reels, YouTube Shorts, on your website, and in your newsletters. So, to directly answer some of the questions I get most often about what is a podcast, just having a YouTube channel is not the same as a podcast. Podcasts may be available on video, but most importantly, podcasts are available in audio on a consumer's cell phone and are syndicated via RSS feed from your podcast host account to all of the various podcast listening platforms. If you want to include YouTube or other video platforms in your distribution of your show, you totally can. You don't necessarily need a videographer to create a podcast. Depending on the quality you want to produce, your budget, what you plan to do with your videos, you can totally hire a videographer. Even if you're recording audio only, you could go to a sound studio. Some of my clients go that route, and some record at home or in their office with their own equipment. There's no wrong way to do it, as long as your selections align with your goals for your show and your time and your budget. So think deeply about what's most important to you regarding your podcast. Is it sustainable for you to get on video multiple times a month? Can you record at home, in your office, or do you need a studio setting and a videographer? The main things you need to get started with podcasting are a podcast host account, a microphone, and the ability to record and manipulate your audio recordings into an MP3 file so you can upload them into your podcast host account. Now, I did run into someone who thought they had a podcast because they were recording audio into a podcast host account using their phone. However, listeners couldn't find it because the additional steps hadn't been taken to distribute the audio out to apps like Apple and Spotify and Amazon Music. So just like you've heard those heartbreaking stories about people investing in their 401k only to find that their money was actually just in a cash holding account and not really invested in the market, you want to take the steps to thoroughly syndicate your show, or at least have someone do it for you. If you want to do video, you need good lighting, a good camera. There's probably one built into your cell phone, like this one right here, and a microphone. You'll still need a podcast host account and a YouTube creator account. When we're onboarding a new podcast client through Podcast Abundance, whether they're launching a new show with us or we're taking over the post-production on an existing show, we walk together through a series of questions to uncover the podcaster's vision for their show. It's in this process where we learn whether the creator wants audio or video or both, and whether they've set up a podcast host account or a YouTube channel already. So if some of what we already talked about is confusing, or you don't have the patience to do it yourself, that's fine. That's why Podcast Abundance was created. We set up your accounts, properly edit and post your episodes so you don't have to. As the podcast host, you're just responsible for the content creation piece. This includes ideation of topics, scripting or outlining episodes, scheduling interviews, and recording the actual episode content. Every future potential action, like editing and posting, getting your brand visible, or even the pride you might feel when you get to say, I have a podcast, can't happen until you record. No matter what, your first few recordings feel clunky. You may forget to turn on your mic or hit record on one of the cameras, or struggle to figure out where your audio files got saved on your computer. It's all part of the learning curve. As the podcast management team, we are responsible for editing your audio and or video, coming up with a great title for your episode, drafting a compelling episode description, and repurposing your episode based on our agreement. During our audio and video editing process, we are removing background noise, taking out echo or reverb, correcting color in your video, and editing the dialogue so no one will ever know about your mispronunciations and mistakes, because we want to ensure you're featured as the most knowledgeable, professional, confident version of yourself. To recap, what is a podcast? It's a consistently produced audio or video recording that's distributed using an RSS feed to various listening apps and even YouTube. The purpose of a podcast for financial service professionals is often to educate their listeners. Podcasts also just work naturally to attract ideal clients because the more often they hear your voice and receive good information from you, the more they trust you. That's it for today. Next week, I'll answer your questions about how to effectively use podcasting as your marketing method for your business and attract those clients.